Awesome. And we're live. Jeff Charles, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a long time in the making.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for having me. It's finally happening.
Yes. It's my pleasure entirely. So I want to be respectful of your time. You know, it's Saturday, and I know we got stuff to do. Trying to keep things a little shorter than I have in the past to make it more consumable. I want to jump right into it because I think there's tons of good stuff we can talk about. But first, I just want to talk about give us a little brief history of yourself and kind of who you are, what you're all about, and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, basically, I've been a freelance writer I started, I think, in 2014. But I didn't start getting into politics. Well, I've always been into politics as far as being a news junkie and all that, but I didn't really start writing political material until about 2016. During the campaign. So I've done some pieces for various blogs, but then I ended up signing on with LibertyNation.com. And I started with them in 2017 on the day that Trump was inaugurated. So I wrote for them for a while, and then I started doing a Red State in their diary section. And then just recently in December, they made me one of their actual contributors. So I've been with Red State. I'm loving it. And basically just through that and social media, I've gained a little bit of a following, and it keeps growing every single day. So I think, some of the things that I'm saying are resonating.
Oh, definitely. I agree. I mean, I'm one of the people who, when I first got Twitter at the beginning of last year, what I wanted to do, instead of kind of following a mixed group of different people, this might even sound bad, I kind of wanted an echo chamber, because what I wanted was to talk with people who had something interesting to say that I had not heard before. Like, I wanted to make, I wanted to refine my own arguments, and I wanted to find people in my own kind of ideological center to do that with. Because, I mean, the arguments from the left I don't find very intellectual or very, I don't know. There are no arguments, really, if I'm being honest. But like when I saw stuff that you were writing, I was, it took me back, and it actually got me thinking, which kind of is a good segue into the issue at hand here. I think one of the things I found you to be really insightful on are issues of race and holding the Republicans accountable, which is a rare thing, I think. I mean, I think more people are coming around to it now, and it's a good thing because it's something that even I hadn't considered in the past.
Yeah, I would say that the GOP establishment, and when I say the GOP establishment, I'm not just talking about the party leadership. I'm also talking about the conservative punditry class, the conservative media. For decades, they've always had the same narrative about the black community, and a lot of the things that they say are either incomplete or just outright false. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the reasons why somebody like myself gets some pushback on the right, because I'm saying things that they're just not used to hearing. And it's not just me. I mean, you've got Sonny Johnson, you've got Felicia Killings, you've got Roderick Threets, James Chief. There is a pretty good number of us who may not have a platform of like a Candace Owens or a Larry Elder, but we are out there trying to, I'd say, challenge the establishment narrative. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of the pushback comes from a little bit of cognitive dissonance, because that's what happens when you're told one thing for decades and you end up repeating it over and over again, only to hear somebody on your side contradict it. And I think it's different because if it's somebody on the left, usually they're doing it because they want to call Republicans racist. Their intentions are not exactly sincere. But when it's coming from somebody on the right, it's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the waters that we have to kind of navigate. And I think that a lot of conservatives have been really receptive to it. They may not agree with every single point that we make, but they can see the overall logic in what we're saying. And a lot of it is stuff that they just didn't think about before.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is you wrote a piece about, I think, the issue of black fatherlessness, fatherless households, broken homes in the black community. I think I just recently saw, I think on one of Steven Crowder's Real Conversations, where he kind of mentions in passing that it was over 80%. Last I saw, the stat was like 75%, something like that.
Wow.
But, after reading your piece, you say that, no, it's closer to 40% because the way they do the stats is incorrect. And, it's closer to 40%, which is still high and still high among the other groups. But, it's not 80%,
Yes.
which to me kind of seemed more accurate just when you look at other stats, when you look at, crime stats. I know the stuff that I've read from the Brookings Institute and Heritage Foundation, there's I think there's a pretty wide consensus that, children from broken homes have an increased, susceptibility to drugs and crime and just, a lower standard of living generally. And when you kind of look at that, it's not like 80% of Black Americans are, involved in all these things. It's more, it's lower than that, and it's closer to 40%, I would say, which kind of matches what your statistics said. So it kind of made sense to me, just kind of looking at other information.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with that particular stat is that the stat itself isn't necessarily wrong or bad as far as I know. It's the way it's used that is the issue. Conservatives and people on the left have actually used this stat in a way that is misleading and deceptive. Mm-hmm. And but the problem is that they know that when they put these stats out there, that most people aren't going to think about it critically. They're going on with their everyday lives or working, they're doing whatever, and they trust their media to tell them the truth. So
yes.
That stat is, and I've heard anywhere between 70 and 75%. I'm not sure where Crowder is getting this 80% from. He should know better than that. And I like Steven Crowder, but he should know better than that.
I think he was just rounding up, if I'm being honest. But go ahead, continue.
Oh, okay, yeah. He could have been rounding it up. But even then, I mean, Crowder is a popular pundit, and he may not even know, because I don't think that everybody really knows that stat is being used deceptively. So they just end up repeating it because that's what they've heard. But what that stat says is that 70 to 75% of Black children are born to single parents. Mm-hmm. That's all that it says.
Yes.
You can't. But the thing is that they extrapolate from that means that 75% of Black children are raised in single parent households, and obviously this is used to say that most are raised by single mothers. Mm-hmm. Which it's not that doesn't happen. I was raised by a single mother, but when you look at U.S. Census data from 2018, it shows that the percentage of Black children that are being actually raised with just one parent is about 39%. So again, that is still way too high, but it's still important to understand the reality, because 39% is way different from 75%. 39% sounds much easier to overcome than 75%. 39% paints a different picture of Black fathers and Black families than 75%.
Yeah, absolutely. 75%.
Yeah, and that 75% figure does not take into account the number of children who are maybe born to single mothers, but then their parents get married after they're born. That happens all the time. That's not ideal, but that happens all the time.
True. I mean, better than, I'd say a single parent, definitely.
Exactly. It also does not take into account the number of children that are born to both parents, but they cohabitate without getting married. Again, not ideal, but it's not the same thing as a narrative that they're painting with that, and I prefer truth over narrative. And the thing of it is that even with parents or children whose parents may not live in the same home, the father is still involved. Studies have shown that Black fathers are actually more involved with their children in a divorce setting than other cultures. So, like I said, not ideal, but not exactly the picture that they're painting.
I do wonder, though, because I know from reading Thomas Sowell and how studies can be incorrect just based on, how difficult it is to actually conduct an accurate study on some of these things. I do wonder, though, if you're being raised in a household where the parents are maybe divorced or not married, but they're kind of co-parenting, I mean, at the time when you do the study, I mean, you might find that a father might be in the household currently. I mean, are there any good studies that you're aware of that maybe show kind of longevity, long-term? Because I wonder if not, maybe at the time when they do a study where a father might be in the household, but then they kind of might be on or off, or maybe there's a new boyfriend in the house, or, 1 year and then, you know what I'm saying? I'm just wondering if studies have kind of accounted for that.
I haven't really found any. They might exist, but I haven't found them. But yeah, there are situations where there might be a stepfather, or maybe something happens to the father. Maybe he gets incarcerated, or he passes away, or he just abandons his kid. But somebody else steps in, and that's also important. Again, not ideal, but again, much better than what the narrative says.
I agree.
So is that an issue that the Black community needs to tackle? Most definitely. But I think that there's a lot that goes into it. There's the cultural issue, definitely, because sometimes people think that I'm blaming everything on external factors. I'm not. I'm just trying to tell the whole story. I'm trying to paint a more full picture rather than just honing in on one aspect of it. I mean, there are a lot of things that contributed to that breakdown. Now, conservatives always say it's welfare, and I am 100% with them on that. I think welfare had a huge contributing factor in that equation. But you also have to look at the war on drugs as well, that disproportionately imprison blacks, despite the fact that blacks do not commit drug offenses more than other races. And when I say drug offenses, I mean being caught with drugs or selling drugs. It's about the same as white, Hispanic, and anybody else, but they were targeted more often. So that also contributed to it as well. I mean, government policy does have an impact, and there might be policies that that they may not intend to have these outcomes. But in some cases, I think some of those policies are intentional, and most of those policies, guess what, are being done by Democrats. So I'm not really sure why conservatives always push back against the idea that there is racism in the government system and in the justice system. In the places where blacks are being treated the most unjustly, it's Democrats doing it to them.
That's interesting. What do you, so if, and I admit, I've read a lot of your stuff. I haven't read that one in particular. What do you think the reason for that is? If Black Americans and non-Black Americans are using rates at the same rate, why do you think that, we have the incarceration rates that we have then? Is it that like maybe whites are using them, but maybe not, I don't know, like in the streets or committing other crimes while having drugs, or, I mean, they're using it in the house, or I don't know. What do you think the reason for that is?
Yeah, what you said is part of it. There's a few different factors. So obviously the higher crime areas tend to be in minority neighborhoods, blacks and Hispanics. So they tend to get patrolled more. They get targeted more. There is also the aspect that a lot of the drug deals in the inner cities do take place outdoors, but a lot of them take place indoors. And with white drug use, a lot of them take place indoors. But the studies that I've seen have acknowledged that reality, but said that it does not account for all of the disparity. So there's something else at play here. Now, is it racism? It could be. I don't always go straight to racism because I can't read the minds of the officers who make the arrests and everything like that. But it definitely is a racist outcome, regardless of intention. Now, sometimes it is just straight up racism. Like I recently wrote a piece, I don't know if you saw it, about a month ago. There are about 5 or 6 former New York City police officers who were suing the police department in the city.
Oh, yep.
Yep.
I saw that.
Their supervisors were basically pressuring and forcing them to target specifically black and Hispanic passengers on the subway who were jumping the fare. But according to these officers, when they went to arrest Asians for doing it, or whites for doing it, their supervisor told them specifically not to focus on white and Asians who were breaking the law. They weren't saying that blacks and Hispanics were doing it more. So according to them, they would go to the area where Chinatown was, and they would be arresting a lot of people until they were told not to. So in some cases, it is racism. I've heard the same type of case in Florida a while ago. I can't remember which city it was, but same thing. They wanted the officers to pull over more blacks and Hispanics than others. And there's been a lot of studies that show a certain bias when it comes to even traffic stops, like in the D.C. area and also in Florida. They did studies in both of those places. And basically, they found that while black and Hispanic drivers were not more likely to break traffic laws, they accounted for most of the stops and most of the searches, even though those searches didn't turn up any drugs any more than anybody else. They were just targeted more. Interesting.
And yeah, going back to what you were saying earlier, I mean, how you go out of the way to make sure that you're just facts. You're not assuming people's motives, which I really appreciate, because I think that really does advance the conversation a lot. And like kind of, other people might just jump to the conclusion that, oh, these people are bad or these people are good. Like, you're kind of very level-headed about it. And I really respect that about what you're doing and everything and how you communicate online and everything. While I'm thinking about it, how do you actually define yourself? Like politically, are you, would you identify as kind of a constitutional conservative, more of a libertarian, a conservatarian, as it might be called, maybe like a Pan-African nationalist sort of? I mean, there's so many different. The more I started looking into this, like the Hoteps and the conscious black conservatism, and all these things, it's there's so many different things, so many different factors. Where do you fall in all this?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, especially among the non-establishment black conservative movement, you do have the Hoteps, the conscious black conservatives, and you've got people who don't identify as any. I just identify myself as a conservatarian. I'm a conservative with libertarian leanings. I will say that it feels like every day I'm becoming more libertarian, but I don't think I'll ever go full-on libertarian or ANCAP or anarcho-capitalist. Yeah, I just define myself as a conservatarian because I do have conservative leanings, but I also have libertarian leanings as well. So basically, I'm for limited government. I don't want the government interfering. I'm for liberty, and that's kind of where I take it from there.
And one of the things that, beyond just that, you're making the case of messaging. You were the first person that really talked about messaging to me, which I had not really considered in the past. I was one of the people who thought that, and actually I'll say this, if I'm being honest. I remember one time, you hear, as a, standard conservative listening to the usual guys, the usual pundits, you look at kind of Candace Owens and you would say like, oh, she's doing such great work for the black community, this and that. And I'll never forget, I saw her at some rally, not personally, but like, just on on TV or on YouTube. And they, she's up there and talking, oh, this about Black America, this and that. And I'm like, yeah. They go to a shot to the crowd and it's all like older white people. And I just remember thinking to myself, that's kind of odd because I thought she's supposed to be like this huge black icon. And I at that moment, I kind of thought maybe something's going on there. But I really, I kind of left it at that just as a thought in the back of my mind. And then you were the first one to kind of start pointing out like, yeah, there's a reason for this. And you were talking about that. Can you give me a little bit about, the problems that you find with kind of Candace Owens and what her, what she's doing?
There are a lot, but before I go into it, I'm going to say I have nothing against Candace Owens personally.
Yes. I agree, actually. I as I would say, I think both, you, Candace Owens, Felicia, I think all of you are engines of liberty as far as I'm concerned. But I do think that, we all have stuff that I think we could do better. I think that, obviously her with messaging and, I think some of the other things going on in the conscious black conservatism that I do have some concerns about as well. But, otherwise, I believe me, I would love to have Candace Owens on. I would love for her to talk to Sonny Johnson and Felicia. I want us to have more conversations about this stuff because I think that if we could hammer out our differences and kind of get over some of the, the problems that we're having, I think we could have a really strong political presence and we could really make some serious changes.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, this is nothing against her personally. Also, I'll say that this isn't just about Candace Owens. The message that she preaches is not her own. It's been part of the GOP establishment for decades. She's just the latest one. She's just the latest face of it. So what's happening is, well, actually, I'll go into it, but first I'll ask your audience a question. When was the last time you heard somebody like Candace Owens or Brandon Tatum or Larry Elder? When was the last time you heard them say something positive about the black community? Yeah, exactly. And I'm saying that knowing that Candace Owens has said positive things about the black community. But you're never going to know about it because they are few and far in between. Because the majority of her overall message, and it's not her message, so maybe I should separate it from her a little bit. The overall GOP establishment black conservative message, one, is not really for black people. They're not getting up in front of black audiences and saying these things because they know what will happen. And I'm not going to be too careful here. This message is mainly for white conservatives and black conservatives and other conservatives who buy into the idea that blacks are slaves on the plantation. I have an issue with that framing, that blacks vote for Democrats primarily because they are brainwashed and want free stuff. They don't want to work. They don't want to just peddle racism. They don't want to move past racism. This is the picture that the establishment paints of black people to a mostly white audience. So that message does not resonate with black people, which is why it's no wonder that at a Blexit event, you're going to see 80-90% whites and Hispanics, and I'm being generous, maybe 20% black crowd. But I mean, I've seen pictures of the crowds at various events. At the last one that they had in Atlanta, which is like the black mecca of the United States, they had to bus people in from other states. Now, as far as people in the establishment and in Blexit and other groups, I think that most of them have good intentions. They might actually think that they're making a difference. But to me, like I said, this messaging has been around really since the 60s and 70s. And it has failed since then. It has not made a difference. It has not moved the needle. And it never will, because the message is demeaning. A while ago, probably mid last year, I went to some Facebook groups and I asked other black people, black Democrats and black independents, why the message of the black conservatives is not resonating with them. And I posted that on Twitter. That generated a huge conversation. And at some point, I may even write an article for Red State about it, although I'm not sure if the audience is ready for that yet. And I didn't necessarily even agree with everything that they said. I just wanted to get their perception. But it had a lot of truth to it, because they tend to talk down about the black community in ways that they don't talk down about white voters or white people living in poverty, white people living on welfare, all the same stereotypes. And their message isn't really one that shows that they understand the black experience. And really they have a lot of white conservatives thinking that most black people are like Ta-Nehisi Coates or Sean King or the people who just really are all about the race baiting, when the reality is that most black people aren't really into that. I mean, if they might think something's racist that you might disagree with, but they don't think that everything is racist. Not all black people are race baiters. Look at what happened in Virginia with Governor Northam. They did a poll, and the majority of black voters forgave him for it because it happened 20 years ago, and they knew that he wasn't a racist. Most black people aren't quite as sensitive to these issues as the media on both the left and the right make us look. So what's happened is that they've created this inaccurate picture of the black community, and it's become ingrained in the conservative zeitgeist. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to fix. I mean, I'll write articles about how black people are actually trying to improve their communities, about how wealthy black individuals are investing in the communities to revitalize and rebuild them, because you're not going to see that on Fox News. You're not going to see that in most major conservative outlets. So right. People don't know. And I think, I mean, I've had some people acknowledge, they've acknowledged, hey, I see that you're trying to change the way we see black people. So a lot of them, are open to what I'm saying. I get a lot of pushback, but I get more curiosity and more acceptance than I do pushback. For some reason, I just tend to focus on the negative, so I always focus on the pushback. But again, going back to the establishment conservative message, that is the reason why it's not working. Because it's that, and it's also the fact that their arguments lack nuance. They don't tell the whole story, like I was saying before. They'll only tell part of it, and that creates a misperception. So as much as they're saying that Trump is getting more support, and I do think that Trump will increase his numbers among black voters in 2020, not by a whole heck of a lot, nowhere near 35%, nowhere near 50%. But I think he'll get a little bit more because he's actually trying. The problem is that on the right, we focus just on Trump. Well, what happens when he's gone? The GOP is still going to be doing the same thing that they're doing now. And Trump was meant to be an anti-establishment figure. And those who follow him, they say they're anti-establishment, but when it comes to the black community, they're all in lockstep with the establishment. So I'm trying to kind of break through that thinking and get them to get a little bit more nuanced instead of relying on the intellectually lazy arguments.
Yeah, I know, going back to that whole the Democrat plantation and how, blacks are on the Democrat plantation ideologically now as opposed to, physically, kind of reminding people of slavery in the past. When I first heard that myself, I remember thinking wow, that is really that's like a pretty strong metaphor to use. And I get what you're saying, but And this is even me back then, before like I was really kind of, thinking about things. I was just kind of like, oh, I would never actually say that to anyone. It's like, even back then I knew that's very kind of condescending and like that's kind of risky. I would never say that to somebody. But I do want to talk about, and this is one of the things that I've struggled with a lot, kind of trying to understand this from Hoteps and conscious black conservatism and everything, this idea of the black experience. It seems to me that if you were to talk to a Candace Owens, a Felicia Killings, like a Tommy Sotomayor, like a Leonidas Johnson, you would get, if I were to ask all of them, hey, what's the black experience? I think I would get a different answer from each one of them. And so for me, it's kind of hard, if we're going to talk about messaging and, there's messages that work with the black community and others that don't. Is there a consensus maybe that I'm not aware of that what is the black experience? What is it? What does it mean to be like pro-black? I guess if that's the same thing, which maybe they're not. Now that I'm thinking about it, but go ahead.
Yeah, you're always going to get a different answer no matter who you ask. I would say that what most of us would have in common. And when I'm talking about the black experience, I'm talking specifically about African descendants of slaves, because the experience of a black person who descended from slaves would be different from that of somebody whose grandparents may have come from Kenya or from Nigeria or another country. Most of us are taught about slavery from a young age. We are taught about racism, although the extent to which this is instilled in us depends on where you grew up. It depends on specifically your parents and your community. I was always taught that racism exists. I've experienced racism as a kid, and also when I've gotten older. But I would say it's what the common undercurrent is that the legacy of slavery still has an impact today. Things have gotten a lot better since, obviously, since slavery and since
hopefully
the 60s. But there are still areas where racism still has an impact. Now, a lot of us disagree on the extent to which racism has an impact. I think people on the right tend to dismiss it almost completely, and then people on the far left say that it infuses every aspect of our lives.
Yes.
Which I don't buy that for a second, because it just doesn't. But again, I mean, I came up in Southern California. Somebody who came up in Mississippi might have had a different experience from mine. So I would also say that part of the black experience is also overcoming what has been done to our ancestors and how that has also impacted us today. Like, for instance, I'm sure you're familiar with that poll that came out with the Washington Post about how blacks feel about Trump. Well, that poll also analyzed how black voters feel about being black in America. And a lot of their views, and they had a very bleak outlook on life in America as a black man or a black woman. But even at the end of that, 65% of black voters said that they were optimistic about their own lives. So what that tells me, to some they thought that was contradictory. They thought that was a little bit counterintuitive. To us, it's not, because we always believe that we can overcome it, which sounds very conservative to me, I might add.
Yeah, and actually that reminds me... Oh, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's the best way I can describe it. I mean, everybody's going to tell you the black experience is something different to them, and that's fine, but I think the overarching theme is, from what I've seen and from what I've heard other black people say, is us always having to work harder to overcome racism in American society.
Interesting. And, that's a really interesting study that you bring up when you talk about the details of it. It reminds me of actually the one that Larry Elder talks about. I think it was like in 79 or something like that, where they polled black Americans and they said, basically it was, is racism a problem? Like, and they're, yes, it's a big problem. How is racism in your own life? Oh, no, I've never experienced it. So it was kind of that idea that there's all this racism happening, but like, no one is claiming like that no one's saying that it's happening to them. And that was kind of interesting to me. And they were very hopeful that, like, it was the same thing. They were very hopeful that, the country was going to do really well, and they had really high hopes for the future and everything, despite the fact that they thought all this rampant racism was going around. So that's quite interesting. It's almost like the same study, but
yeah, Yeah, you know what? They actually had similar studies to that under Bush and under Obama, where, I mean, I don't think you're ever going to find a black person that says that they have never, ever experienced racism. It's just, again, the extent to which they say that racism has impacted their lives. And black people were more optimistic under Bush and under Obama. They, in numbers of like 70% and up, I believe.
Yeah.
They said that being black in America, you could still succeed. And obviously those numbers have dropped considerably under Trump. And, people on the right will just blame the media. Yeah, the media is at fault, because one of the things I cover most of all is the media, because they have a huge influence over everybody, not just black America. So yes, the media is a part of that. The other part of that are the Democrats, always constantly calling people on the right racist, which they've been doing for decades. And a lot of that, so your listeners aren't going to like this, but Trump does bring a lot of that stuff on himself. Not saying he's a racist, but he does bring a lot of that on himself by the things that he says and the way that he conducts himself.
He is careless. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Another part of that will be a lot of the people that follow him, the people on the conservative side. Because the conservative movement, again, since they always want to push back against the idea that racism is an issue, when racism does occur on our side, or something that could reasonably be construed as racist, we either avoid it or we try to gaslight and say that, there was nothing there, like, Congressman Steve King. I mean, that guy's had a history of making racist comments.
Yeah.
And we tend to ignore it until it finally becomes too much. So, I mean, there is that issue on the right. And I'm not the only one that says this. I mean, I believe Michael Steele has said this. I believe Colin Powell has said something to this effect. It is an issue. So it's a lot of different factors that would make the average black American believe that racism is a huge issue.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with that is when I see conversations online, you see like the heavy MAGA supporters, and I sympathize with them. I get where they're coming from. But like, yeah, that issue of like, racism is on the right, like almost non-existent, and on the left, it's in every conceivable aspect of life. And I don't think we're actually talking about the same thing when I see that. I see, like, because I understand when people are saying that racism isn't a problem in America, I think what they're actually trying to say is that there's no institutional racism, there's no governmental racism. Like, we've really made a lot of progress. We're not saying that racism as like a belief that an individual can have is eliminated, because I don't think that's ever going to happen in the physical world that we live in.
Sure.
It's never going to happen. And I think when people hear that, they just hear like, racism isn't a problem, even when there is actual, like you pointed out, there's New York City police officers, and like there is racism in people's hearts still. And so I don't think we're speaking the same exact language. You're just saying things and kind of assuming that the other person understands it. So one person will say, no, racism isn't a problem because it's not in the government. And other people will say racism is a problem because, look, that guy over there is actually a racist. And then there's that disconnect, and then that divide that drives wedges between people. And I think that, like, if we just took the time to kind of explain that, at least if I'm correct on this, which I think I am, I think we could bridge a lot of gaps there.
I think so too, and I think it's also important to remember that where you're hearing these arguments are not necessarily from the mainstream of of both sides.
True.
We're hearing from more of the fringes. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with that study called Hidden Tribes that talked about how 80% of Americans are not on either fringe. They may lean right, they may lean left, but they're more towards the middle, and they want to have these conversations, and these conversations actually do happen in person all the time. You just never hear about them.
Yes.
Like one of the places I used to work, I remember there was a white guy who loved Trump on our team, and there was a black guy who hated Trump and was on our team. Mm-hmm. And they would talk about it rationally.
Yes.
And there would be things that the white guy would concede about Trump, saying, yeah, I mean, he says a lot of stuff he shouldn't say. The black guy would say things like, yeah, I'm glad that I don't agree with the wall, but I'm glad that he brought the issue of illegal immigration because that's a problem. Mm-hmm. These are normal, rational conversations that people have, I believe, every single day. But you'll never see it on the airwaves. The media has done their job well.
Yes.
And the media, the left and the right, because they profit when we are divided. So I think that making those types of conversations more mainstream is a great idea. I'll actually compliment Candace Owens. I haven't really watched her PragerU show a whole lot, but I know that she had Hawk Newsom from Black Lives Matter on there, and they had a civil conversation.
Yep.
I know that she's had others. Sometimes Dave Rubin will do this too, but I like that, and I think we need more of that modeled. But again, the fringes and really the powers that be don't really want to push this. They want to push their own narrative, and they will push down anybody else who contradicts it. Like, I mean, Red State, what other major media outlet would have a black conservative like me saying the stuff that I say? I mean, they hired me. They hired me on knowing what I was going to say because I would write in their diary section. But they wanted but they want actual diversity of thought, and they want other ideas out there. So I think that, and I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but it creates a perception that black conservatives are a monolith and that we all think alike. That's not necessarily the case. But I think if we have more of these conversations, things will get better.
Yeah, I think I'll push back a little bit on you. I would say that people on the right, even like the mainstream right, like I would say the Ben Shapiro, everyone's blank. I mean, Gavin McInnes. I mean, any, I guess, typical conservative pundit, most of these guys are starting to have some kind of interview show where they're trying to get people from the left on. Gavin McInnes had his at the time it was called Free Speech Presents, where he would try to, his only goal was to get a liberal on to have some civil conversation with someone. Ben Shapiro has a Sunday special. Crowder used to do all these interviews. Oh God!
Yep.
All these guys, they're starting to go towards that model, and I don't see anyone on the left trying to do that. And being in this space for just about a year, it is almost impossible to get like a liberal on because they have no intention, and it's surprising to me. They're very opinionated, but as soon as you want to talk to them about it in like this kind of format, they will not do it. It is so hard to get an actual liberal on, and I've heard this from other guys in this space. And now that I'm kind of in here, I see it, and it's crazy. They're not interested in having the conversation whatsoever, and I think there's a good reason for that.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is that, and this is something that the right does do better than the left, because you're right. I mean, people like Ben Shapiro are trying to have more shows where they can talk to people from the other side in a civil way. Ben Shapiro also gets birthday greetings from people on the left who can't say that they know Ben Shapiro because they'll be ostracized by their own side.
Yep.
So I think that there are a lot of people on the left who would love to have these conversations, but they know what will happen to them if they do. Also, you look at the intellectual dark web. A lot of those people are on the left.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
They've been willing to talk to conservatives, and they get reamed by their own side doing stuff. So,
they become alt-right.
and realistically, that's part of the Marxist. Really, the Marxist political DNA. Mm-hmm. You don't have engagement with people who disagree with you. You shut them down. Yeah. And again, I'm not talking about everybody on the left. I'm talking about the far left.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's been the tactic. I think that's why they use this, racism as a political weapon, is that they want to dehumanize you so that the idea that they even could talk to you, it's like talking to Hitler. Like, you don't want to talk to Hitler. You don't want to hear what he has to say about anything. And nothing he could possibly say whatever he would say would be wrong anyway. Even if he was like, don't do drugs, they're bad for you. We'd be like, no, you're Hitler. You're wrong and you're a Nazi, And it's that whole dehumanizing thing that I think that's what they want to do. And I think that's purposeful because they don't have any ideas. They don't have any arguments. So and it kind of, to me, says this. Well, this is why you don't want to talk to us, because you don't have good arguments.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier to just shut somebody down by calling them a racist. And I mean, the whole race baiting and even bigotry baiting is a really good political tactic, because not only does it shut your opponent down, it also diverts from your own racism. Like, for instance, you take the issue of illegal immigration. So if somebody wants reasonable controls on immigration, mm-hmm. and maybe even wants to limit legal immigration to a certain extent, they get called xenophobic. They get called racist. Mm-hmm. But guess what? Open borders policies are racist as hell, because letting anybody come in who wants to come in, and as many people as possible, legally and illegally, disproportionately impacts the black community. It hurts us more than it hurts everybody else, but you're still going to promote this policy that is going to hurt the black community when you say that you protect them. What's the best way to distract from that? By calling the other party racist. Mm-hmm. Same thing with gun control. Like Maj Touré says, all gun control is racist.
Yes, it is.
But they're so great at labeling conservatives as racist, and the GOP establishment let them do it. I can't let them off the hook. They allow them to pay that way. Mm-hmm. But realistically, this is part of Marxist totalitarian thought.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I want to shift gears a little bit and get back into the conscious black conservatism and everything. In your, I guess, best efforts, I attribute this to you. I think you're a part of this movement. I think you're, well, correct me if I'm wrong at all, but I think you're well familiar with kind of their positions and everything. Tell me, in your own words, what is conscious black conservatism?
That's a lot. I mean, I would say conscious black conservatism, or really any type of non-establishment black conservatism, it's a movement that really wants to take an honest look from the right at the black community. Mm-hmm. It recognizes that the black community is inherently conservative. There may be some left-leaning beliefs on certain issues, but at its core, black Americans are not Marxists. Yeah, now you have your individuals who are, but in general, it's not. And we believe that the right should treat the black community as fellow citizens rather than looking down on them. It's recognizing that somebody being pro-black doesn't necessarily mean anti-white. And conscious black conservatism really is wanting to really sell true conservatism to the black community and to other minorities. We want more diversity on the right because we all hate socialism. Conscious black conservatives hate socialism because we have seen firsthand what it has done to our communities. Like I said, the most racist policies that are around today, it's not the right pushing them, it's the left implementing them in our cities. And if the right really cares about fighting socialism, then they will start reaching out to the black community, to the Hispanic community. Because where was AOC elected? It was not in a suburb of Iowa. Mm-hmm. It was in a city, it was in New York City, in a predominantly minority area. Mm-hmm. If the conservative movement does not widen its tent, the United States of America will become a socialist nation. I fully believe that. There's no way that the GOP can go the way they're going right now, and the progressives don't end up winning. It just won't happen. It's impossible. So I would say that conscious black conservatism wants to see economic success in the black community. We want more black Wall Streets like mm-hmm. we had back in the day. Mm-hmm. We want more black entrepreneurship. We want more black families. We want more successful black people. And we know that the way to get there is not through progressivism. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think that we take these issues more seriously than the establishment does, because the establishment is satisfied with their platitudes. They're satisfied with their narrative. They don't really want to go deeper and really understand how to attract more minorities to our side. They're serious when it comes to rural and suburban white voters, because that's been the low-hanging fruit. I understand that was a political strategy, but it's not feasible anymore. And so people who are non-establishment black conservatives really want to affect change, and we want the government out of our way when we do it.
Mm-hmm. That's all great stuff. I agree with all that stuff. I'm surprised that, well, actually, I'll put it this way. Do you think that is there any elements of, black nationalism, or this idea of being pro-black and everything? Is that at all incorporated in conscious black conservatism?
As far as black nationalism goes, it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I know that's a vague term. I guess I would just say, the way...
It's hard to define sometimes.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're talking the same language here. I'll put it this way: what I've seen lately from people like Felicia and kind of the Hoteps, they are about this kind of sort of pro-black. I mean, the only way I can describe it is like pro-black nationalism, where like they are focused specifically on like the black community, and with only like kind of building it up by only emphasizing like, hey, blacks are the best at this. Oh, we're so good at this. We were kings. This, this kind of language of really like bolstering them up and everything. And I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just wondering, like, how does that work with kind of coalition building? Like, what does that mean for like non-black Americans? Like, it just seems like anytime people start criticizing or questioning or kind of trying to analyze conscious black conservatism, it gets to this area where it's like, oh, well, the white conservatives are out and they're trying to say this and that. And, sometimes it comes off as a little condescending, kind of a little insulting, but at the same time, maybe I'm not fully understanding what they're saying, and maybe I'm missing something. And I just, what are your thoughts on that? Or do you even know what I'm talking about? Am I sounding crazy right now?
No, I know what you're talking about. I actually expect you to ask me that question. Mm-hmm. First off, I'll say that among non-establishment black conservatives, you do have a lot of different groups. Mm-hmm. We don't all agree with everything that the other says. I've seen some that are more segregationist. I wouldn't say that most of us fit in that category. I'd say like 90% of us don't. Mm-hmm. 80%, 90%, I don't know. But I think what's happening is with some in various groups among us, they have a distrust of a lot of white conservatives, mainly because of the message that's been promulgated for decades. The issue, though, is that that's not your fault, not you personally. Mm-hmm. You didn't do it. But I think sometimes, just like everybody else does, a lot of us tend to lump people into one category and believe that people think as a monolith. So while you may be asking an honest question, but for every one of you, there are other people, other white conservatives who are mm-hmm. really just getting into the conversation just to try to invalidate it without really trying to engage and understand with what we're saying. Mm-hmm. So I have a little bit more patience for it than some of the others. I'll put it that way. They know me. I'm more the diplomatic type because I understand where it's coming from, and I can usually tell if somebody isn't really sincere. And in that case, I won't say much to them. Mm-hmm. But it's easy to react in the same way to somebody who's sincere as you would to somebody who is insincere. Mm-hmm. Do I like that tendency? No, I don't. I would fix it if I could, and that is something that I do talk to some of the others about. I tell them, look, not everybody is really trying to discredit everything that we're saying. Some of them might just have an honest disagreement. Others may be actually trying to understand, and we have to be able to discern between those who are sincere and those who really don't want to understand and they just want to talk over us or talk us down or give an uninformed opinion without really trying to understand where we're coming from. Like, to me, and I think we're all like that to a certain extent. I mean, if I'm making a statement or if I'm talking about something and somebody just comes at me as if they know more about it, even though I lived it, mm-hmm. well, take a step back, let's have a dialogue, mm-hmm. and then I want your opinion then after I know that you understand. Because it's like, say, if I were in a group of Hispanics, I'm not going to go telling them about their culture unless mm-hmm. I listen first and try to understand what they're saying. Mm-hmm. This is something that Hope Steph Jesus has brought up on one of his periscopes. I'm not going to go with a bunch of Koreans and start telling them what they need to do or what's wrong with their culture or anything like that. No, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to try to understand. I'm not going to come from a level of arrogance because it does come off as arrogant, even if that's not the intention. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where they get a lot of the pushback there. But I will say that for the ones that they can tell are actually sincere, they are more accepting of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's been my kind of experience. Is that it's actually a great example of this of the subject here is I think a couple days ago. I was engaging with a gentleman online. I can't remember his name, but I'm sure you were I think tagged in all the posts. But
yeah, I remember.
I had brought up I'm trying to remember the full context of it now. You were replying or retweeted something about how I think it was Liberty Hangout said something like, "Oh, whites are oppressed" and blah blah blah. And I kind of said, like, well, no. You saw that. So I was like, well, are they oppressed? Like, no, typically no, excluding, I think, affirmative action, which I think is ridiculous. But, taking that out of the equation, no, they're not oppressed. However, there is an issue, I think, a real issue of this, just this idea of white hatred, that it is culturally okay to literally hate on whites in any way you can. And I kind of cited Sarah Zhang from the New York Times as an example of that, how it's very okay in media and Hollywood and entertainment. It's okay to hate on white people, and you can never say any of the things that they would say if you were to swap out races. And then I had a gentleman kind of think it was funny, and I'm like, okay, like, is that funny? Like, and can you explain it? And what makes me so mad, so frustrated all the time is I'll either get one of two answers. Either they just will condescendingly say, like, oh, like, you're white, you'll never understand. Or they just say, like, oh, do your history, know your black history. And which is funny because I actually have now, I'm kind of, I don't know how I'm going to release it yet, but I've done a lot of research into this because I keep getting the same answer, research black history. And I've found some pretty interesting things, but, we can get to that later on. But, it's, as someone who is trying to engage with people and trying to understand, it's really just a missed opportunity where they have an opportunity to articulate their positions. And I think it's sad because I don't think they've ever done it. Like the gentleman I was talking to, I don't think anyone's ever challenged him to articulate his positions before, which means that he could be holding on to ideas that are incorrect or bad, but he's never going to know that because he's been able to hide behind this, like, oh, well, that person's white, so he'll never understand, even if I tried to explain it to him. But the fact is, he's never even explained it to himself. He couldn't even articulate it if he tried. And I think that's a tragedy. I want people to rationalize their positions, go through their own ideas, and clean themselves up a little bit. I've done that with myself, and that's how I've come to talk to people like you, where I learned, wow, I was actually not exactly correct with this.
Yeah, and I know who you're talking about, and I think what happened is that he made an assumption, and he assumed that you were trying to say that whites are as oppressed as black people,
yes.
Which you weren't.
Yep, I think you're.
The thing is, but the thing is, there are white conservatives who will say that seriously, like the tweet that I was responding to would say that.
Yes.
So again, I think he could have benefited from trying to understand where you were coming from, because I have seen him have better interactions with other white conservatives who may have come off a certain way at first as well. Mm-hmm. So people like him and others that I've seen, they can have those conversations, but I think a lot of times, and maybe after you ask him that, he realized, oh, okay, well, this guy isn't really trying to say that. He isn't trying to echo the same sentiment, and maybe he just didn't want to engage after that. Mm-hmm. But I think that on our end, I mean, it's just like if I were to talk to somebody on the left and I bring up a certain idea, they'll blow me off instantly too. I think that all of us have the tendency to do it, but I think we all need to do less of it. I think that, a guy named Shelby Steele, another black conservative, a while ago, this is when Obama was running. He talked about the differences between the different types of black people and how they approach these types of issues. Mm-hmm. And he said there are two types. There is the challenger, and then there is the bargainer. The challenger would be somebody like a Jesse Jackson or an Al Sharpton. To them, a white person is racist until they prove that they're not. Oof. Whereas with a bargainer, somebody like a Barack Obama, he will basically have the message of, I'm not going to assume that you're racist until you show me that you are. Mm-hmm. I've always tended to fall into that other camp because I translate that to other issues as well. So there are people who will give you the benefit of the doubt until you prove that you don't deserve it. But then there will be others who will just see you a certain way until you prove that you're not. And that's a much harder obstacle to overcome. So I think a lot of black people on the right and the left, they kind of have that one of those mentalities. So when you experience a lot of one thing, like in this instance, when you experience a lot of white conservatives saying certain things about black people, and the message is overwhelmingly negative, it's easy to transfer that onto somebody else who is also white and conservatives, mm-hmm. who is asking a valid question. And I think that we would all benefit from kind of pulling out of that and understanding that everybody is an individual and allowing them to prove us wrong.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think, and also we have to remember this is also Twitter. This isn't like some Harvard intellectual, you
Oh, you
know.
cut out.
So I
You,
understand.
you cut out a little bit there.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I was saying that I also, want to remind people that this is also Twitter. So, oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. My phone is telling me I have a poor connection, but I think I'm good now. But yeah, I was just saying that it's Twitter. I don't. This isn't Harvard. This isn't some intellectual. Where everyone's on the same page. It's Twitter. It's a cesspool, and more often than not, 10 times out of 10, the people talking to you, or they're just trying to troll you. They're trying to make a point on you. They're trying to get you in a gotcha moment. They're trying to make themselves. They're trying to be right. They're not trying to seek understanding. They're just trying to own people and think. And be condescending. And I get that. So if people treat me like that, I try to do my best to, and I don't always do it. Sometimes I fail, but I try to be as articulate and clear and concise and, I guess, caring as I can, really.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, if that would have happened in real life, it wouldn't have gone that way. I
Yes.
think that if you were standing in front of him and you were coming in a way that was honest, then he probably wouldn't have reacted that way.
Yeah, no,
but you're
right.
right. I mean, yeah, the internet is accessible and it brings out the worst. I mean, a lot of the comments that I get on my articles that don't go with the narrative are from people who really just want to troll me and they just want to whatever. But I know that they don't represent the majority of conservatives. A lot of people just don't make comments.
Yes.
I mean, most of the people who comment are people who are more on the fringe. So when somebody leaves a comment saying that basically Red State hired me because I'm black and because it was like an affirmative action type of thing, I have to remember, okay, this guy is not representative of most conservatives because most conservatives actually don't approach me this way. Mm-hmm. But it's easy to focus on those people.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back to what you were saying about... oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it takes more work to not let those assumptions color the way you view the next person that you talk to.
Absolutely, definitely. That's why, I always try to approach a new conversation, even with the same person. If it's a new conversation, I'll see where it goes, and that's all you can do. And again, it's Twitter, so you got to work with those constraints. But I did want to ask you about, so people using the term or the race, throwing racism around at people. To me, I think I'm jaded at this point. If someone were to call me a racist, at one point in time, it would be really meaningful, and I'd really kind of be concerned about it. I honestly, at this point, couldn't care less about it. It means literally nothing to me anymore. And I think that's actually... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was agreeing with you. You shouldn't care.
Oh, and it's like...
That's where we're...
I think that's such a bad thing, because now, it's gotten me to think well, now this is, if it doesn't mean anything anymore, then that means that this is the time for racism to actually maybe start blossoming, because now no one's paying attention. Now it has no real definition. And I think that's a tragedy. And I think that one of the things is that we've gotten so, just like you said, if I support a secure border, I'm a racist now. It's well, maybe I might be. Maybe I just don't want non-whites coming across the border. Or maybe I just care about national security. And I think we're just assuming so many motives, and everything is just, if it has any trace or hint or minute where it could be racist, it all of a sudden, you're guilty before, without a trial, basically, without any reason. And to me, I think it's going to be a problem over time.
Yeah, it is. And it's insidious. And most of the people doing it are on the left. Although I am seeing more people doing the race baiting thing on the right, but it's still the left that owns this.
Well, let me actually, I want to just bring this up because you're right. I mean, we have this Groyper phenomenon with this Nick Fuentes stuff. And
yes, Nick Fuentes.
And well, he was on Censor.tv, Gavin McGinnis's new network. He was on and Milo has a show every Friday. Milo Yiannopoulos, he's got a show on there on Fridays, and he had Nick Fuentes on, and I'm listening to this guy, and he's against race mixing, and he's he kind of believes, it's kind of like an old Jared Taylor argument where it's listen, whites should have a country, blacks should have a country because, the cultures just don't mix. And, he's kind of got a different perspective, though, because he kind of grew up in Japan. And so he's like, well, we have Japan and they're Japanese people, and that's fine to have like a Japanese nation. And when I listen to him talk, I honestly hear a lot of the same things from like the black nationalists, like a lot of like the Hoteps and everything, where they're like, you know, Marcus Garvey, not William Nell, but maybe Carter Woodson, Benjamin Quarles, kind of these guys, these guys with all the Hoteps were telling me to research, basically.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I wonder if Nick Fuentes and kind of like a resurgence of kind of this like at least segregationism is that because of all this like kind of white hatred mixed with kind of this pro-black nationalism, anti-white kind of, or maybe not anti-white sentiments, but I just wonder, like, is this a response to what's kind of been going on in the culture, like against white people?
I think it's always been boiling below the surface, but with social media and alternative media in general, it's kind of come a little bit to the surface. There are a lot of Hoteps that believe more on the segregation, like the voluntary segregation, not government mandated.
Yes. Yeah, I want to be clear.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that camp, although, I mean, if people want to do it, I mean, that's the libertarian side of me. If you want to do that, then you can do it.
Yep.
It's not something that I would advocate for. I don't think it's something that, one, is necessary, and I'm not sure that it's something that is sustainable with the way things are in America. We are a melting pot. So I think that that there is that element of that, and there's that with Nicky Fuentes and that whole movement. They have their own movement too. Hey, if they all want to move outside of the country, I am fine with that. Go, get out of here, go. But I think that, again, these are more fringe movements. These are not mainstream. There are people who would like for the Groypers to seem like they're mainstream, and that would be the Groypers themselves and the progressive left. They would love for these people to be mainstream. But they're not. But I do think that a lot of it is a response to the left's race baiting. And like I said, the progressives own this. Again, not regular liberals. I'm talking about the far left progressive crowd who have basically removed any meaning from the word racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever they want to say. I mean, when you said that if somebody can call you racist and you don't care, I can't believe you. You should. I mean, I can't blame you. I mean, because I'm sorry. If AOC is calling somebody racist, I almost immediately assume that they're not, because it's AOC saying it, and that's what she does. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of the progressive leaders who call you racist and call conservatives racist, they don't even believe that you're racist. Now, I can't read minds, but I don't believe that they actually believe you're racist. It's purely a political tactic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the whole, what was that called with Ezra Klein and under Obama, where all these journalists had this forum where they would talk about how they need to support Obama or skew the news to kind of favor the president and favor the left. There was one instance, and because this whole thing was blown wide open and all this was exposed, that these journalists from different news outlets had this forum where they would talk about how they can skew the news towards a more progressive agenda.
Oh,
and,
yeah. I mean, I've known that since I was like 18.
yeah, exactly. But this actually, I mean, we all knew it was true.
Yeah.
It was exposed. And I can't remember the name of it, but it doesn't matter. But there was one exchange where they were talking about one of the opponents of Obama, or somebody who was criticizing Obama or criticizing the left. And one of them came back and said, well, the way to handle this is just call him a racist. He did not. Now, if you look at the way he wrote that text, he didn't say, "Oh, point out what he has said that is racist," or point out the fact that he is racist, or say, or bring up things that he's done that are racist. He says, "No, just call him a racist." They know that what they're saying is not true, and that's just one example. But at the same time, most of these people don't actually believe what they're saying. They just know what it can do for them. Like when AOC called that senator racist because he said that that I think Rashida Tlaib or somebody else in the squad was sympathizing with Iran. AOC called him a racist. Now, she knows he's not a racist because he said nothing racist in that comment. He talked about what they were doing, not about their actual beliefs or whatever. But still, their constant use of that word really is what got them Trump, because he is a middle finger towards them. And there are a lot of things that I hate about Trump.
Oh
But
yeah.
there are some that I like when he comes up against that narrative, when he starts hitting the media for calling everybody racist. I get a smile on my face. I
Me
wish more
too.
people would do it. This is what we needed to be doing for decades. Like I said earlier, the progressives painted conservatives as racist, and conservatives allowed them to do it. They should have been doing this stuff before,
Yeah.
and then maybe we would have needed somebody like Trump to be a bull in the China, a bull in the China shop.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's funny. When I was younger, my father would listen to Rush Limbaugh, and he would always play. And he's probably still doing it today. But he used to play these montages. You probably remember if you used to listen to him. He would play the montages from the media and how they all were using the same exact words. Like, I mean, and you still see it today, where like all the liberal networks will literally say the same word. Oh, Trump and Russia, Russia hoax. And it's not like they won't like say Russia hoax. Another person will say like, oh, Russia conspiracy. It's like Russia hoax, Russia hoax. But they all say the same phrases, the same words.
Walls are closing in.
Yeah, walls are closing in. Yes. And it's like, so, even back then I was like, oh, so they must have like meetings about this, because how else do they all say the same exact stuff? Like, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is, and I don't think that is always a case of them like meeting in a smoke-filled room. But I think there is kind of an understanding. I mean, most of the journalists in the media are on the left.
Yeah.
So,
or at least
I
they're
think when
reading each other, and then just
they're reading
reciting.
each other, and they're repeating it, so they have a script. So I think that's what's going on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised though if they did have meetings, and then maybe other times they're just like, oh, he's saying this, so we're going to say this, and I think there's definitely some coordination one way or another, whether it's organized or not. I don't know. I want to shift gears a little bit into one of the other kind of issues that I've been struggling with, the colorblind society and conscious black conservatism. I've been really struggling with this. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I'm still struggling with it a lot. From my perspective, it seems to me that, and I'll put it this way too, that when I've changed the term, when I say, listen, I'm not going to say colorblind society, and I've talked to my friend Dijon Francis about this. I go, instead of colorblind society, what if I say color accepting? And he goes, that's awesome. That's the message right there. And then I'm just like, okay. And then I go, well, how do I define that? And I literally copy and paste colorblind society into color accepting. And I'm just like, what is happening here? Is the messaging that important, or is that like, what's the effect here? Like, I don't understand it, because it's from my perspective, what I think the black community has wanted, I think from day one, is to be treated just like everyone else wants to be treated. And when people talk about the colorblind society, somewhere along the line, that became, hey, we don't see you as black. We reject blackness, or your black experiences and everything. And I think that's what's been turning off black Americans from that kind of terminology. And then when I say, well, no, color accepting society, I get you are a black person. You've had experiences, because of race and everything. I totally accept that. I'm not rejecting any of that. But I also, but then go back to this. I want to treat you like I would treat anybody else. And it's so like, I haven't really wrapped my head around it. Like, I'm still trying to articulate it correctly. And I don't think I've really done it here. But I guess what's going on with that? To talk to me.
Yeah. So a lot of it is, I would say, a disconnect in the understanding. Like you mentioned, like, this is what black people have wanted. This is what we have fought for. I think that the perception is that we wanted to be seen just as Americans, and that's it. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the case. So just to explain that a little bit more, the whole colorblind phenomenon, and I understand what a lot of people mean when they say colorblind. Mm-hmm. And Roderick Threets actually had a really good podcast on this a few months ago. I know you've had him on your show before. Mm-hmm. But when you say that I don't see your color, to me it's like, well, that's a part of who I am. Not necessarily my color, but my culture. Mm-hmm. I'm a black American. I descend from slaves. I grew up as a black American, and I love my culture. It's the thing is, the problem isn't seeing color. It's what you do when you see it. So if you see color and you still treat them as you do other people, that's great. You can acknowledge that I am a black man. I can acknowledge that you are a white man. I can acknowledge that somebody from Mexico is a Mexican man or woman. America is made up of a lot of different cultures. We all have an overarching American culture, and then we have subcultures. So there's black culture, Hispanic culture, white culture. Although I don't really, I mean, with white culture, I don't really understand that because, I mean, you have Scottish, you have British, you have French.
Yes.
So,
Russian.
Russian, yeah. And if somebody says, you know, I'm proud to be Irish, I'll be like, that's awesome. I love the Irish people. I love you know, I'll drink a Guinness with you. But but I think we've been trying to move away from that for some reason, and I don't get it, because I think the idea that we have different cultures is a beautiful thing. I love experiencing different cultures. If I meet somebody from another country, I interrogate them. I want to know all about them because I'm curious that way, and I think that we've kind of lost some of that in this whole colorblind thing, because this also exists on the left. It's not just on the right. So I think what happens is that when you say, oh, you should just be an American, it implies that, well, my culture, which is a part of who I am, it's not all of who I am, but it's a part of who I am, you want to ignore that. So I think there's that aspect of it. But there's also the hypocrisy angle here. And you probably see me tweet about this, because the same people who tell me that I should just identify as American, they have something different to say if somebody posts a Twitter on video of 3 black teenagers robbing a store or doing something to a white person or even fighting amongst each other. Once they post that, all that colorblindness goes out the window. They're not saying, oh, look at these Americans doing this and that. They start saying, oh, well, look at these black teens. Look at these black people doing this.
Yes, I have. Oh, go ahead. Finish.
Yeah, blacks commit 50% of crimes. Well, no. If you actually mean what you say, you would say, oh, no, Americans commit half of the crimes in the United States, or half of the violent crimes.
Yes. No, yeah. Oh, go finish it. I'm eager to jump in. Finish your thought.
Yeah, so when you see us pushing back against that, we're pushing back, one, against the idea that our culture doesn't matter, and two, we're pushing back against the hypocrisy of it, because most of these people don't really mean what they're saying. It just sounds nice, and they only want to bring it up if I say I'm proud of my culture, or if I say something positive about Black America. So go ahead. I know you want to respond.
Yes. So this I think is also one of the big disconnects, is that when people say, like, it's like you point out, oh, you know, at one point you're colorblind until you see this. And I'm just like, I sit there and I think, I don't think this is the same thing, though. I think this is kind of a different context. When you're talking about a colorblind society, you're saying that, hey, we're going to treat you equally. Like, well, I guess in the sense that you described, I guess it makes sense, because you're saying I'm denying, like, I don't see race at all. So in that case, I guess that's where you see the hypocrisy, because that's not how I was brought. That's not my vision, my interpretation of colorblind society, which is maybe right there. Maybe we just identify the problem live. But when I see that, I see, when people say, oh, look at these Black Americans, it costs 50% of the crime, and this and that. One of the things that I've been concerned about is when I see stuff like that, about like the crime stats, for example. Oh, it's twofold. I think the first problem is that they make it seem like like this is a Black American thing. Like, oh, only the part of the Black culture is engaging in crime and drugs and this and that. And I don't think that's true at all. But I think that the reason people point those things out is like, oh, like, hey, look at the amount of crime committed by Black Americans. This is a problem. I think the reason people are pointing that out is not because they're racist or because they have some kind of ill or malintentions. I think it's just a matter of disproportionality. Like, when you have a certain group, engaging in some kind of activity that is, given their proportions in a whole society, I think that we should pay attention to that. I think that's, I don't think that's something we should ignore. And I think it's the same standard that we use when we talk about, like, the radical Muslim culture. I mean, I think we have, 1% of the population is Muslim, and they own a disproportionate amount of their own kind of crimes, if we look at those kind of stats. And so I don't think that, looking at I think that's the issue, is that we're just, when those issues are brought up, it's a matter of, like, what is happening with, for crime? Like, what is the crime with proportion to the population sizes of these things? And it's, whatever we look at it, it's disproportionate. I think that's why it gets brought up, not because people are accusing or they're saying that Blacks inherently are drawn to crime or something like that. But let me know your thoughts on that.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. I would say the first thing is that I don't have a problem with people talking about black crime statistics. I am actually deeply concerned about it. Black on black crime is an issue. Some of people will say, well, yeah, but most whites are murdered by other whites. Yeah, that's true.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is disproportionate. So black people are more likely to get killed and just murdered in general. I mean, people talk about blacks commit the most violent crimes, but they don't bring up the fact that most of the victims are black.
Yes.
That's what I want to think.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm concerned about. I mean, I lost my cousin to that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of black people know somebody, have a family member, or they have a friend who died in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but the problem is when people use these stats to create a narrative, because realistically, those crimes are committed by less than like 1% of the entire black population, and yet they will still use it to paint us as dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
The average black person is not going to do anything to you, and I'm talking about whether it's in Chicago or in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
If you see a black person walking up, he's most likely not going to do anything to you.
Yeah, you'll be
now,
fine.
If you're in a place that's a high crime area, then yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I think geography has more to do with it than anything else.
You are exactly right. I mean, it's geography. It's also, poverty plays into that. I mean, and that's a whole other subject, but, about why so much poverty exists. It's the Democrats. But the majority of black people aren't going to hurt you. So, yes, I do think that black on black crime is an issue because it's disproportionate. I just don't like the way it's being used by a lot of people on the right. Like, for instance, when was the last time that you saw a conservative pundit, white, black, or otherwise, list off a black crime statistic, but then also put forth a solution?
Yeah, it's true. Well, I mean,
Doesn't
maybe
happen.
more policing besides that. I mean, I don't know. Or it's a vote out the Democrats. I know that.
Yes. I would have so much more respect for these people who throw out these statistics if they would actually say, you know what, 50% of violent crimes are committed by black people. Look at where they're living. Why don't we go in and try to do something about this? Why don't we pressure the GOP, who does not want to do this? Why don't we pressure the GOP to start getting some conservatives elected there so that they can start making a difference? If we actually believed in conservatism, we would want that to happen. But no, most of the conservative pundits who talk about black crime statistics have no intention of trying to affect change. I'm not saying that they need to go over there themselves. I'm not saying that they need to go in there and try to run for office or whatever, but use your platform to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Urge, like Laura Ingraham. I don't agree with a lot of what she says, but I've seen her tweet on 2 occasions about how horrible Chicago is, and both those times she tagged President Trump and said, go to Chicago and speak. We need people to go there to actually sell conservatism. But this is where I talk about truth over narrative. Most people are more concerned with narrative over truth. The thinking is so ingrained that I can write an article about how Chicago's homicide rate has decreased for the third year in a row.
Yeah.
And the responses that I get from that.
I remember that.
And again, most of them are like, okay, that's good. But the rest are like having to figure out a way to make it make sense to them, because it's almost like they don't want to believe that it can go down because it involves black people and because it involves the Democrats, and that's the narrative that they've been taught over and over and over again.
Well, then you lose the talking point, because now if Chicago is getting safer, then that must mean the Democrats are doing something good. And you know what? Like, believe it or not, maybe some, it's not always national. Like, sometimes people at the individual level, or the local level, the state level, they might have a little bit different ideas than those at the national level. Like, it's not like you gotta. That's why it's so important to be specific. So, hey, when you posted that, I was like, that's great news. That is so good. I enjoyed it. I wasn't resentful or mad that I lost my Chicago talking point.
Well, and it's interesting because I can tell that a lot of them didn't really read the article, because if they would have had a reasonable response. The reasonable response would be, yeah, the mayor of Chicago is a Marxist, but how does she decrease crime? Not by using Marxism. She used a conservative solution. Rahm Emanuel had basically gutted the anti-gang unit of the police department. She put a lot of that back. She hired a lot more police officers that Rahm Emanuel had pushed out. So what happened is that they have more policing. She got more policing in certain areas, and that has helped. Okay, great. That's not exactly part of the progressive playbook, but sometimes, every now and then, more than we think, Democrats at the local level will use conservative solutions. I mean, Cory Booker, when he was mayor of New York, he helped to cut down on crime a lot, and I guarantee you he didn't do that by embracing Democrat policies. So it's okay to acknowledge that. It doesn't mean that you support their government. I still want her out of office. I'd rather have a free market conservative in there to spur economic growth. She's never going to do that. But I can still say, well, it's good that the rate is going down, and that this kind of bears out what we're saying about what needs to happen to cut down on crime.
Yeah, and I think it's just an example of you need to look at people objectively. Like, they're not always no person is going to be all fully good or fully bad, unless maybe you're a Barack Obama, but
You got the lot.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, you've got to take it objectively. Like, even here in Connecticut, we had a local election with Jennifer Leeper and Brian, oh God, his last name escapes me, but like, I actually got to speak with her and she's a Democrat, and honestly, like, they were running on the same stuff, like, oh, better schools, better this, better that. Like, it was really, I even asked her, and I was like, actually, I asked one of her little campaign people who go canvassing the houses and stuff, and I was like, what do you think the real differences are? And she had a kind of a tough time explaining, oh, he wanted to kind of cut this and that. I was like, oh, okay, I don't know, he says he's kind of for that stuff, but but things change when you're at the local level. But to your point on what the narrative is in conservative media, and about the it I'm trying to think, how can I word this? It is a tragedy, I think, that the only stuff out there, like whether we're talking about education or media, when you're talking about Black Americans, Black history, so much of it is just like slavery and crime and slavery and drugs, and like you're right, like there's nothing like positive that's ever taught anywhere about Black history, and that is such a tragedy, because when I started looking into it for myself. And I'll give the person who really started the initiative with me was David Barton. He came out with a book called American History in Black and White.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep, and he, I saw those videos and I said, holy crap! And he gave a whole list of people, Black Americans, famous Black Americans, and I started just taking that apart and started researching each one of them. That's how I know, like Booker T. Washington, Joseph T. Wilson. Benjamin Quarles, Carter Woodson actually is the guy who stands out the most to me. And just like, just going down this road of researching these guys. There's a guy, John S. Rock. He was a licensed doctor, dentist, and attorney, and he was the first Black American to be a Supreme Court lawyer. It's like William Nell was, I think he's the first guy that David Barton talks about. He's written these volumes about Black Americans fighting in the American Revolution, fighting for freedom, fighting for independence, fighting for the Constitution, and the ideas, like all these great ideas that we believe in, that what makes America America. Black Americans were fundamental in making this happen. James Armistead, he was a spy for, I think, General Washington. He was the first. He was 007. He was James Bond of America.
He was Black Bond. Black Bond.
He was Black Bond, and like literally, without him, we wouldn't like. I would argue he might have literally turned the tide of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
And it's like, and to me, when I look at that, and I'll tell you a quick story. I know I'm kind of going along here, but I think you'll enjoy this.
That's fine.
When I had the pleasure of being in this law enforcement academy a while ago, and at lunchtime it's like, all right, I'll just go to lunch and whatever, do whatever. You could go into this like little room, and most people chose to like be like sit in their cars or whatever, and I wasn't about that. I was like, no, I want to get to know everyone, I hang out. And what I noticed is that like people kind of, it seemed like they self-segregated a little bit. Like we had like there were a bunch of Black guys in there, or Black Americans, and I don't think they would mind, but they they would sit down, and I just start eating with them every day, and we were talking with them, and I enjoyed it because they were having the most fun. Like I don't want to sit in a car and like be my, like that's dumb to me. No, I want to be with people. I want to interact with people, and And I remember we were sitting down one day. We just got done going over these classes about like all different cultures, and they covered, you know, Puerto Ricans, they covered you know, all the Mexican and this and that. And then we, you know, I didn't think twice about it. I was like, oh, you know, whatever, da da da. We go to lunch and they're just like, hey, like, anyone notice what was missing there? And I was like, what? What do you mean? And they're like, yeah, what about the African culture? And I was like, oh my God, like, wow. And I just, you know, I thought about that and I was just like, wow, like, now that I think about it, like, where is like African American history? Like, where is like, or just not even African American, African history? And then it's kind of, you know, and here I am now and I'm thinking about it, you know, education, the crime stats, kind of things I just talked about, how the history is just so negative. And it's such a tragedy because it's such a lie that like the idea that America or the Black Americans don't have some kind of place in America, that they weren't a part of any of the, you know, of the building of America and the founding of America. No, they 100% were, and it's such a tragedy that's not taught.
No, you're absolutely right. I actually when I was younger, I actually, for a little bit, I went to an all-black private school. Actually, it was called Marcus Garvey School in LA. And,
that's awesome.
and you know, I learned, I learned a lot about Black history that I never would have learned in public school. They'll only teach you about Martin Luther King Jr., which is important, but
sure.
There is so much richness to Black American history, and you don't really hear it talked about. And that's why I appreciated when David Barton it was Wall Builders, and they made that whole series. I remember listening to it, and now I actually want to go and get it now because I want to go over all, because there was a lot of, I missed most of them.
There's more, if you get the book, there's more information in the book than there is on the YouTube videos.
Okay, then I'll be checking that out. I mean, because I really appreciated them doing that. Like, I wish I could thank them for that in person, because nobody else is doing that. But even more than that, I'm not going to say nobody, but you're not going to hear a lot about the positive things that Black people are doing right now. Now, you will see some of it on the left. I mean, I'll see it on Black sites. I'll see it on more left-leaning publications about the positive things that Black people are doing in their community. But you're never going to hear about that on the conservative side unless the guy is wearing a MAGA hat. So one of the things I'm trying to do on Red State, I'm trying to highlight more of those stories, like the story of these two former gang members who hated each other, tried to kill each other back in the day, and now they're working together to get Black youth off the street and into something more productive. They're trying they're reaching out to at-risk youth and making sure that they don't get involved in that lifestyle. I want to highlight people who are investing, especially using opportunity zones, Tim Scott's opportunity zones, who are using those to revitalize their communities. I want to highlight people like Nipsey Hussle, who had a hard life. He was in the gang life, got out of it, made a fortune through hip hop, and unfortunately he passed away last year. But he used that to rebuild his community. I want to highlight more stuff like that because this is stuff that conservatives, both Black and white, are not seeing. So that's one of the ways I intend to use my platform. I also want to highlight minorities who are running for office, especially on the conservative side, because nobody is giving this side of Black culture. And that's why I asked you earlier, when was the last time you saw somebody in the establishment say something positive about the Black community? Nobody listening to this is really going to be able to answer that because they just don't. And I want to be one of the people that works to change that, because Black people are doing great stuff right now, and it's not hard to find if you just go online. But I want to bring that to the audience as well.
Yeah, and I think like you said, I think today, like if you research it, you can find it. I mean, we have Black police chiefs, we have Black federal prosecutors, we have Black state attorneys, attorney generals. I mean, There are a lot of successful Black people. I don't think that's in dispute today. And it's just like, but like you said, it's not talked about. And it's such a tragedy because I don't ever want people, like, especially, I don't want Americans feeling like they don't belong here. To me, there's something wrong about that. Like, I don't like that,
Yeah. And I get it. I mean, and that is a misperception that is created, again, by the media on both sides and also by what we're taught in schools as well. Because if you look at what we're taught in schools, again, it's all about oppression. I mean, you've probably even seen people like Hotep Jesus and people that aren't even part of Hoteps talk about how movies about Black people only get popular if it's about us getting our asses kicked, basically, or being slaves. Well, what about movies showing Black businessmen black people in Black Wall Street. They'll talk about how Black Wall Street was torched and how it was taken down by racism. They won't talk about how it was rebuilt and how it flourished for a long time. We need more of those stories out there too. I'm not saying that the negative shouldn't be talked about. I'm not talking about subtraction. I'm talking about addition.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's bring in the other side too. Let's get, again, a more holistic view of the black community, especially on the right, because the right needs it. They think they know about black people, but they don't. They only know one part of it because conservative media only tells one side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about it. As far as like as a historian, like I want to know. I don't want to know the good or the bad. I want to know the truth. I want to know the whole story, the good and the bad, because I think it just. I mean, anytime I think operating in the truth is just the best way to conduct yourself anyway. But I do want to ask you. We talk about Hotep Jesus. Obviously, he's a huge figure online. I actually recently stopped following him because I feel like I don't know where he's coming from. Like at one point he's saying like, oh, I'm against socialism, this and that. When I was interacting a while ago with another Hotep, I think it was Hotep Black Mountain, I think his name was, I guess a better way to say that would be this. I would say, it seems to me that the Hoteps are kind of more about business and just being countercultural. Like they're never gonna really like agree. Like they'd rather just disagree with someone than agree with someone for the sake of disagreement, just to kind of have like a one up on someone. I don't know how serious he is about like real ideas and real stuff. I could be wrong. I could be entirely wrong. But that's just I just get a vibe that he's kind of more just about like he's a businessman. Like he wants to kind of like stir the pot a little bit. Get people talking about stuff, I don't know. I get he's got ulterior motives. Yeah,
well, yeah, but he says his ulterior motives openly. He says that a lot of this is about his business, and I think with the Hoteps, there is a bit of a contrarian streak there.
Yeah, contrarian. Yes.
With Hotep Jesus, he likes to trigger people. I mean, there's no way around it. But the thing is, he'll go between both because a lot of his tweets will make you think, but then other tweets are just designed to get certain people mad. And sometimes he's doing it because I'm going off of what he has said. A lot of times he's doing it for research purposes to see how people react to certain things. So it's a lot of different things. He's using it for his business, for his brand. He tweets to also give certain ideas that maybe people may agree with or may not, but it'll at least make them think. A lot of times when he does his videos, he does drop a lot of knowledge. I don't know if you saw his conversation with Sonny Johnson.
I saw like 20 minutes of it. I wanted to finish it because I'm going to have to do that now that you reminded me. It was good. It was good. I didn't agree with everything, but like I get it. Like I wanted to see the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, and what I like about him is that he's willing to explore those areas that others on the right aren't. And Sonny Johnson is a wealth of knowledge. And you may not agree with everything that she says, but when you listen to her, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn quite a bit. I mean, and that conversation went on for a long time.
Yeah, it was like 4 hours, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. There were a lot of gems there. And most of it was her talking, and Hotep Jesus was in a position to where he was learning. So I think with him, he is hard to figure out, but I think that's part of his brand. I mean, he's almost like I don't know, but like the Joker. You can't figure him out.
well, I was gonna say, I remember when I was talking to kind of Black Mountain, I think at the time, I can't remember the exact conversation, but I was just kind of saying that like, no, I think like Hoteps are more like right leaning, like, and I know this because I went to like the Hotep Jesus website. And it was like, what is Hotep? Because I was curious, what is Hotep? And it's like, it's like, hey, we don't agree with like, we're not right or left, but like we tend to agree with more on the right. We tend to be more right leaning, this and that. And so I pointed this out. I was like, no, like even on the website, like it says you like Hotepism, I guess, is more like this. And actually, Hotep Jesus entered the conversation, was like, no, Hope Black Mountain is more correct. And I'm just like, how though? I don't understand. Like then to me, it was like, are you just doing this just to be contrarian? And like, it was hard for me to kind of gauge his motives. And then over time, I was like, this guy's a businessman. Like he's doing this for ulterior or alternative reasons. And for me, like, I'm trying to have like genuine conversations. So like for me, like, and it's funny because even though I unfollowed them, I still see his tweets everywhere because people are retweeting him and liking him, and it's like I can't get away from the guy.
He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. I mean, and
He does.
And I like following him because, I mean, the trolling stuff is fine or whatever. I mean, sometimes I'll follow trolls. Like Michael Malice is kind of the same way. He trolls a lot, but sometimes he'll also say something that makes me think. So I follow him for that. I didn't see that conversation with Black Mountain. So I mean, I don't really see any leftism in them. But I mean, they could explain that better than I could.
I'm not saying they're left. I think he didn't want to be pinned down. Like he didn't want to be like, no, he was.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of those. I think it was a misunderstanding. I think because it was one of those like, oh, you need to research your history, this and that. And I just I got so sick. That was that moment where I was like, you know what? I am going to research Black history. I'm going to go down this journey because I'm so sick of being told this all the time. But
Yep.
But it kind of struck me as like, what is like going on here? Like, you're just contrarian, but I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. I'm still listening. I'm always up to talk to guys, so no hard feelings either way. But I think we're at a good point to stop, unless you have any other major issues that you want to talk about.
No, I wanted to say, actually, it just occurred to me. I mean, you are like a rarity among white conservatives. I mean, you're venturing into this world even when it's not very welcoming to you. I I commend you for that. Because, I mean, I wish there were more like you. I mean, because, I don't know, I don't really agree with the way they always react to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I know where it's coming from. But, I mean, I appreciate that you are willing to keep going, even if not everybody is nice to you. Because, from what I see, I mean, for the most part, people will respond to you okay. But I do see when they don't. And I'm like, wow, I mean, give the guy a chance. I mean, but I think I wish there were, like I said, I wish there were more like you, because a lot of white conservatives are not willing. I mean, because they think that everybody's going to call them racist and whatever. And as far as I know, I don't think they've ever called you racist. But I think they've, pushed back a little bit. But I think the more people have a genuine curiosity on both sides, I think the better things we'll get.
No, I thank you so much for that. I generally am out here trying to just do the Lord's work, man. I just try to I try to love people and just try to understand where they're coming from. And I was always taught to engage in a world of ideas. Like, I didn't, to me,
Yeah.
race, it was inconsequential. Like, as far as I recognize it, I'm not like denying your experience or this and that, but like, what are your ideas? What are your beliefs? What are your policy ideas? Like, let's talk about that. They're either good or they're bad, and we can talk about the merits of either or. And that's what
race isn't going to keep you from talking to somebody about ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It has no bearing on me whatsoever. So it's just, for me, it's like, hey, like, you're Hotep, what do you believe in? What are your policy ideas? Like, let's talk about that. Oh, you're a conscious Black conservative? What are your policy ideas? Let's talk about that. What are your ideas? It's inconsequential to me. I'm curious about it. And I've always been fascinated by it. Let's have a conversation. But it took a long time to get like that. Like, I wasn't always like that. When I was younger, I was, a dumb kid. And, if you go back somehow, if you can find MySpace stuff, like, oh God, I will cringe over that. Totally different person. But we're all, I think, at that point. But like, when I engage people, I want to do it in a mature, adult, articulate, caring kind of way. Like, because I like people. I generally care about people. And I think also, like, I'm concerned with what I see going on, and I feel like we can actually do something about it. I don't think this is something we just have to sit back and take. And I think, for me, the biggest problem is, and I'll kind of finish on this one last point and let you comment, is that I see all this infighting. It is so annoying, because it seems to me that we actually all agree on the same policy. Like, if I took Felicia Killings and Candace Owens and I said, what's your position on, abortion, on this, on that, I bet they would agree with vast majority of the actual policy issues. But then what actually separates them is like, well, I'm never going to be with Candace Owens because of how she talks about Black people, or how she, on how she came to her conclusions, basically. And that drives me nuts. And I'm like, oh my God, if we could just say, like, listen, you're Candace Owens, you don't, like, you might have kept, like, you got to the right side. You got to the same policy, conclusion that I did, but you did it in a different way. You have different reasonings behind it. And because of those reasonings, I am not going to join forces with you. I'd rather let the left win political victories and change policy than join with you. And I think the funny thing about that is I think she has to move now from California to Georgia now because of a policy that's affecting her. At the end of the day, policy is what matters, not this why I believe this or why I believe that. And we might not agree. It drives me nuts. And I want to find a way to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I totally understand where you're coming from, because that's always my first inclination. I always want to be able to work with people regardless of differences. And this is one area where I can't imagine a way to do it. And the reason why is because you're right, we agree on policy. We all have the same views regarding the economy, free markets, anti-socialism, liberty, pro-life, all of that. The issue, though, is that I don't see a way to make the messaging compatible, because it's almost like if you were, say if you were in a war and you have different squads, but you want to basically conquer the other territory, but then you have another squad who is working against you doing that. They're wearing the same uniform, but they're sabotaging the effort. So they may be on your side ostensibly, but if they're messing up your guns, messing up your weapons so that they don't fire correctly, you can't really work for them, even though you might have the exact same goal. With the messaging, the reason why I talk about messaging so much is because, that's part of who I am anyway. I've been in sales all my professional life, so I'm really into persuasion and how things are communicated. But with the messaging, that is that other squad that is sabotaging the cannons, sabotaging the tanks, so that they can't effectively get to where they need to get to. You will never win somebody over by insulting them. And so if that's how they want to approach it, I can't really find an area of commonality in the approach. I may agree with them on the issues, but I can't really see how that's going to succeed, because I'm going to be trying to get the GOP to actually go to the community, sit down with leaders, and talk to them like normal people, whereas they want to rely more on talking down to the black community, demeaning them, and holding events where very few show up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I can't see a way to make that work together. So as much as I would like to, it's just not. It's not realistic, because while they're saying that black people only vote Democrats because they're brainwashed, I want to say, well, no, you're not brainwashed. You have some reasons. I don't agree with you, but let's sit down and have a talk about it. And I want to get the conservative movement to the point to where they want to have that approach. So we're working at cross purposes. We may want the same thing as far as policy goes, but we want different things. We want the conservative movement to do different things in relation to the black community. Only one of those ways is going to work, or both of them could fail. But I know that the establishment way fails because it's been failing for 60 years. It's time for something new. And I don't see how, it's almost like how in the Bible it talks about filling the old wineskins with a new wine.
Yes.
How, it's going to burst, it's not going to work.
Yep.
I think that that's what the Blexit movement and the traditional establishment black conservatism is doing. They're trying an approach that has failed, but somehow they think it's going to work now. And again, I know that most of them have good intentions. They actually think that this might make a difference. But it is time for something new, and that's why I wrote the article about the rise of the new black conservative movement, because it's needed to kind of shake things up and show the conservative movement where it has gone wrong, not with policy, not with ideology, but where it's gone wrong with the way it communicates itself to minority communities. And it's not just the black community. It's also young voters. They're doing horribly with voters.
Yes.
They're not doing very well with women. So there's a whole reformation that needs to happen. And I take it I take it this seriously because I mean what I said before. If the conservative movement does not widen its tent and get more Hispanics, Asians, and blacks into the fold, we will become a socialist nation. It's going to happen. And
Yes, I agree.
And the only way to make that happen is if we change the way we're talking to people. I mean, it's like you can't change the way we talk to people and change the fact that we're just not talking to people in the first place. The two main things I want to change are the messaging, and I want to change the fact that the GOP distances itself from black people, because there's no real good reason for it. It's like they distance themselves from the black community, and then insult them because they don't vote for them. It's like starting a company that has the best product out there, but you don't have a sales or marketing team, and then you think people don't buy from you because they're all stupid.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not them who are stupid. I mean, and yes, there are a lot of misconceptions that black Americans have towards the GOP. And I do harp on the GOP a lot, but we know what the left has done.
Mm-hmm.
We know how the left has lied. It's also that as well. It's both things there. The conservative movement wants to only focus on the Democrats. But again, I want to tell the whole story because that way we can fix the problem. So that's why I can't really figure out a way where the establishment approach would be compatible with the non-establishment black conservative approach.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, off air, but I get the sentiment that you can't work with someone who is insulting you and things you're taking personally. Like I get that, and it's so frustrating because there's so much potential for good and so much that we could be doing. And for me, what I think, if you could merge kind of the resources and the outreach that a Candace Owens TPUSA has, and you merge that with someone like yourself, really, I think you would be a great candidate for this. If they could give you the resources to give you that outreach so that you could deliver that message, oh my God, can you imagine what would happen? I mean, I think literally you could probably get black support in a year of just kind of writing articles, going around, talking to people, going into these communities that are being neglected and everything. My God, can you imagine the victory we could get from that kind of stuff?
I think about it every day, and it frustrates me just like it does you. And it's like, I see somebody like Candace Owens who has so much potential. I know I criticize her approach a lot, but if she changed the way that I think it's too late now, but if she had started out with a more nuanced and realistic message, she could have done wonders. And that's a lot of talent to be kind of wasted in that way. Now I know she has her show now, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's not just me. There are more of us. Like I said, James Chief, Roderick Threets, Sonny Johnson.
Yep.
There are a lot of us, and it's hard for us to break through. I was surprised when Red State brought me on. I'm so glad they did because that's a huge platform. But I think things are changing. I am optimistic, mm-hmm. even though it's tough. We talk a lot about the pushback, but I think change is coming because it has to. So You might have somebody who may not have a mainstream black conservative message, and the mainstream conservative outlets may not want to give them that platform, but mm-hmm. eventually I think we'll win more people over. I mean, Sonny Johnson is affiliated with Breitbart. That's one of the biggest conservative outlets in existence. Mm-hmm. So I think change will come. It may take a while, but eventually people are going to come around and see, okay, this was a bad strategy. It didn't work. Let's try something different.
Yeah, I just hope that, and the thing is, what I would love to see is can you imagine Candace Owens and Sonny Johnson talking, just talking about these issues? It would be so good, but I would hope that they would, that they both would recognize the opportunity between this and, not to make this combative. It's listen to what I'm saying. Listen, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to message. There's a better way we could actually win and defeat Democrats if we united, you give us some of these resources, we'll give the quality messaging that we need. And I think if we could just get together on this, like I keep saying, I think there'd be I think we could start winning. We could start really not only winning, but really getting the policies that we want. And not just because what happens is, and you I know you're fully aware of this, we can get Republicans into office. The next step is to have Republicans actually pass conservative policy, which is the hardest thing to do, I think. Yes. And it's not just about electing Republicans, as we all know. Anyone who's conservative it knows from day one. I remember when I was younger, you're like, oh, we got Republicans. Yeah, we should be fine. No, son, there's a difference between Republicans and conservatives. And then you learn, oh, these people run as conservatives. They say, oh, we're all about this and that. As soon as they get elected, gone. Like now, all of a sudden, now they're oh, we have to work together with the Democrats, this and that. Yep. And it's all garbage. And it's all just, oh, this is just how these were your real beliefs now that you're elected. You like this kind of stuff. You like having more power. You like, watered down liberal policies. And it's like, that is such an uphill battle. So we need all hands on deck. We need, and I'm, as far as I'm concerned, I'm willing to go as far as I can, And this is part of why I did the podcast, is that I saw all this kind of stuff, and I saw, that there are people out there like you who are trying to make a difference, and I want to get your message out there to as many people as I can.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think you're right.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, I think that's we've gone a little bit over, but I think that's good. I think we had a really awesome conversation. I want to thank you so much for coming on. It really means a lot to me. It's been a long time in the making. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
I did. Yeah, it was awesome. I'm glad we were finally able to connect.
Awesome. All right, we're going offline. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.